Installing and configuring View Security Server for external clients. This is one of those topics that is strangely difficult to kind of teach on. And the reason is because everybody's external environment is a little bit different. Everybody has different policies and processes that you have to incorporate to secure things out in a DMZ. Different people have different tolerances for different levels of security. Your security person in your organization may not like you, and so they don't want you to do certain things. We all know. Uh, the, this is a really challenging topic. And so what I'm going to do in this topic is kind of give you the very basic configuration for how View Security Server can get set up. The whole gist of this instance of a View Connection Server is that somewhere out in your DMZ, you want the ability to have a machine that can sit there and serve as I will use the term proxy, although again, I'm using it kind of from a soft perspective, to proxy that communication between the external clients and your internal virtual desktops. Now, View Security Server exists as that solution to connect those external clients to their internal virtual desktops. And so having this machine there kind of acts as a buffer from the outside world so that any kind of traffic needs to hop through multiple machines before it gets into the inside LAN. Again, some environments this works, some environments there may be additional security things you have to lay into place to support this. Now, what's interesting is that the View Security Server generally is not a member of your internal domain. And this is a good thing, right? Anytime you have to take a computer that is a member of your internal domain out into the DMZ, things begin to get very weird because you have to open up a lot of network ports to support that. So instead of making it a member of the domain, you typically make a View Security Server a member of a work group, and then you pair that security server with an internal View connection server via a one-time, what they call a pairing password. That pairing password it's time-bombed password. The connection server waits for a period of time, and if it receives a connection request with that pairing password in it, well, then it assumes that that is the correct server that is sitting out in the outside world. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about firewalls here. If you do end up configuring this, you will have a lot of additional due diligence in order to support those firewalls. You will see some of the firewall settings whenever we go through the installation, but just don't forget the firewalls. I mean, we are dealing with a DMZ here. You are going to have to do whatever's necessary to support the host-based firewalls. In addition, also your layer 3 and layer 4 ACLs on your Cisco device or your firewall, whatever firewall vendor you use. Down under the interaction portion, we're going to spend not very long just talking about, okay, how do you configure that pairing password? It's remarkably simple. How do you install View Security Server? It is almost the same as installing a regular configuration, or excuse me, a connection server. And then how do you set up the external URLs, which in many ways may be one of the more challenging bits here because those external URLs can require working with your provider, whoever's providing your external resolution, if that's not you. I do want to spend just a minute here kind of going over what this looks like from a kind of a whiteboard perspective. I think this will help you understand why the security server exists as a separate machine from the View connection server, particularly if you've never done any work in a DMZ before. So let's assume that we have our virtual machines. And in a standard environment, one where we're just sitting here inside of the LAN, as you already know, we have users that have to interact with a View connection server. Right? So user talks to View connection server, and then ultimately View connection server kind of handles all the communication eventually down to these virtual machines so that the user can work with their virtual machines. This is nothing new. We've been working with this for a while. But things actually get a little bit more challenging whenever we've got a firewall in play. So on the right-hand side of this screen is sort of the inside environment. That may be our company.pri domain. On the left-hand side of the environment is now the rest of the world. So, all right, the rest of the world is out here. That rest of the world is separated by some firewall. And so if a user's out here and that user needs to connect into a machine here, a view connection server, we don't want to open up those direct ports because, well, that's just a really bad idea from a network security perspective. Consequently, the way that this sort of gets resolved is by setting a piece of equipment between the user and the internal view connection server, and that piece of equipment effectively becomes your view security server. With that server in place, all we need to do then is connect up to the view security server, and then that view security server can then interact with your view connection server to eventually work down to your virtual machines. Now, the challenging part here is the fact that, so on the outside, many of us, perhaps most of us, have a disjointed namespace between the outside world and the inside world. You know, your domain on the inside might be company.pri, but your domain on the outside is very obviously not going to be company.pri. It might be something else, like, I don't know, cb2nuggets.com. How do you like that for the plug? So because of that, there's a couple of extra things that are required here to support this external namespace. And it's really it's well built into the system. You just punch in whatever that URL is, and it's going to resolve to whatever this view security server is. It wouldn't be, obviously, this URL, but it might be, I don't know, vmwareview.cb2nuggets.com or something like that. You'll find in just a minute here, too, as we start talking about the PC over IP services, that in addition to having a fully qualified domain name, we also need to have an IP address so the PC over IP will function correctly. So with this in mind, let's actually go take a look at our environment here. I have the view administrator set up. We're taking a look here at servers. I have vcon, the view connection server here. And under the More Commands button, you can see the item called Specify Security Server Pairing Password. Now what this is a one-time password. Okay, it's a timed-bombed password. And it's used so that that outside machine can get paired up with this inside computer. And essentially what it's doing under the covers is creating that authentication between the two. Once the two have that password, that shared secret between the two, we can then use that to deal with authenticating all the following traffic from that point on. So let me punch in a pairing password here and make sure I get it correct on both sides. There's a certain number of minutes or hours that you can set up for the timeout for that password. I'll put 30 minutes in here because that's the default. And now that server vcon is going to wait for that incoming request from whatever that new server is going to be so that it can pair up with that new server. I've got a 30-minute timeout, so we've got to kind of get this thing installed. That's step one. Step two actually requires us to go to a brand new computer. Okay, this is a brand new computer I've installed. This is vcon-s. And the vcon-s computer is essentially ready and waiting. Well, it's a basic bare bones computer, and it's ready and waiting because we're going to install the view connection services onto this computer. Let's go ahead and run through that install. I want to go here under Start, and I'm going to go find where I've actually downloaded the view connection server bits. There they are right there. For those view connection server bits, I will double click to launch the installation. That installation will load. This is really nothing that you haven't seen before. Right, we've already installed, in fact, we've already installed 2 view connection servers thus far, 3 if you actually went through the replica installation. And so thus far, you've seen this process already a couple of times. What's different, however, is this time we're going to install a view security server. And again, as you note here, it says this is used on servers in a DMZ to run an appropriate subset of the full view connection server functionality. Now, a little aside here. As you can imagine, what we're doing is creating, this environment that is connectable from the inside and the outside. And so just like any of those machines that you may set out in your outside DMZ, you have to make sure that you have all those extra security pieces in place. In addition to setting up view security server, you might have, depending on your environment, intrusion detection. You got to make sure you've got these things patched. You've got to make sure you have all the firewall configurations, just everything that's necessary to keep this thing secure, because your connections are going to hop through this server before they get into the inside world. So, all right, here is the item that allows us to connect this outside server, the security server, with the inside server. That's going to be vcon.company.pri. Hit the next button here. If the two connect, well, then we can enter in the password and choose next again. Once those two have actually entered in appropriately, well, then now I can actually supply that external URL and the PC over IP external URL. Okay, so full disclosure, I've not actually segmented this out into its own DMZ. Just the process of doing that is less exciting than just seeing how this installation works. But very, very, very important here is recognizing that this external URL has to be an externally resolvable URL. Okay, I mentioned that before, but I got to kind of just, put a fine point on the fact that if your external clients outside in the world can't connect to this URL, well, then you're going to have a problem. This might need to be, cbtnuggets.com. Okay, the existing configuration here, vcon-s, is being put into this external URL because this machine is currently in a work group. Now, I'm just going to leave this how it is for now because you can adjust this a little later. The next screen here sets up all the firewall rules. Okay, the incoming TCP ports are 80 and 443. Also, TCP and UDP ports 4172 are allowed as well. So hit the next button, install, and that goes about completing the installation of that View security server. Once this installation is complete, I can go back to my original server, here's vcon, and then just take a look at the servers that exist in this environment. You'll notice now that in addition to the server vcon, we now have this vcon-s server, supports PC over IP. Choose the edit button here, and here's where I can adjust again down the road some of those external URLs. So that's really it. There's not much to see from the client perspective. I can connect up a client to this server, and then it will eventually facilitate the access of that client to my virtual machines. But in reality, that's kind of what there is to see here as it relates to View Security Server. Again, another connection server sits out on that DMZ in a work group. You'll notice too that because we're dealing with HTTPS encryption here, or authentication here, you may consider actually installing a publicly, resolvable certificate, so one that you buy from your GoDaddies of the world, to that external machine so that you can support not having to worry about certificate services. In this current environment, if I connect up, I'm going to have the same situation like I did when I was connecting first with that client, in that I'm not going to trust the certificate for this external machine. So again, what have we talked about in this nugget? I've been talking about that View security server and how really trivial the installation is for a View security server. Essentially, it's there. It connects client to the internal virtual desktops, and then the external machine and the internal machine talk in whatever language they need to talk to support that connection. We talked about how that View security server is generally not a member of your internal domain, and how you can actually set a one-time pairing password for supporting that initial authentication. Talked a little bit about firewalls, and then down here in the interaction portion, we configured the pairing password, installed View security server, and configured those external URLs. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.